Hey, what's up, my friends? America and the world, and whomever you are, whenever you stumble upon this at whatever time period it is. The time capsule at the moment is circa Monday, November 20th, 2023, at approximately 1 p.m. my time. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm a muckraking journalist. I'm trying to blast through the impermeable steel airtight case to the world that seemingly isn't hearing what I'm delivering, which is the mana that will change the scope, the trajectory, and how things work. To reconfigure this vassal of empty space and this shadow power that has complete control, that nobody knows, where chaos reigns supreme, and we're dangerously close to a moment in history that we're going to regret in a monumental way if we haven't already the last 20 years, which of course we have, but nobody can keep up because there is so much noise and disinformation and manipulation and technology that can do certain things that can basically pervert and invert and turn everything into a pretzel logic scenario where only robots and AI and hate bots and trolls and troll farms and the full circus and sex bots seem to get the algorithms because of the way things are written. And so it's very difficult for the truth to penetrate. But what is the truth? And who the hell am I to be able to proclaim that I have the truth? Well, is the truth, I don't know, some sort of proclamation of an ideology, of a religious persuasion, of something that somebody feels that's an ideological sort of determination that maybe divine right has involved to be able to manifest whatever the outcome might be. No, no. I mean, that is the nature of all of the elements that create the whole, but that's not the truth. The truth is objective. The truth is who did what, when, and how based on evidence that shows what happened to create an outcome. That's the truth. And who am I? Well, as I mentioned at the outset, I'm a muckraking journalist. I'm an independent producer. Again, my name is Patrick Lovell. You can find me all over the place, but my work is what you really have to use is your guide, your sextant, which was an instrument that was used on the open seas that used the stars to be able to help or manifest how sailors got from point A to point B. And that's what this is. This is your mile marker. This is your guidepost. This is your understanding of the system to be able to break through with the light of the truth through this murkiness of this insane deception and massive manipulation for outcomes that are literally insane. But that's our reality. And if millions of us come to understand what it is that I'm revealing to you, and we walk together, locked arms and lockstep towards a purpose of a vision, we will have the power to break through this kryptonic, is that a word? I like it. Kryptonic. In fact, now that I think about it, those were the skateboard wheels I had back in the 70s, which is kind of cool. But kryptonite, we all know what kryptonite is. Kryptonite is what kept Superman down because of, just the DNA of what came from his planet Krypton. And obviously the bad guys found the only spot of vulnerability to take down Superman. And yeah, am I Superman? Am I the Messiah? Am I this? Am I that? Am I some sort of superhero? No, but yeah, because it's just insane because of what we're dealing with. The media is a extension of propaganda if we're talking about mainstream media to make sure you do not understand the details of what I am revealing to you because it protects the power, which has manifested what has now become a major threat because the powers that be within media decided to play Krypton with the biggest bumbling fool moron that might be like a Three Stooges, Larry Merle, Curly, and Moe sort of abomination of all things reality and truth in the form of the ultimate maggot, Donald Trumpenstein, Trumpstein. I mean, this guy is such an ass clown on such a monumental level, but yet he's become this pathway to a significant real threat, which is fascism. We're on the threshold and on the doorsteps of literally fascism becoming the power of the United States of America, the greatest democracy in the history of the world. And yes, it is a democracy. And here's a word to everybody who gets befuddled when all of the libertarian Republican sect describes this as a representative republic, which of course we are as well, based on the Electoral College and how things work. But what you've got to understand is what they're professing is rule by the minority, which is a grift that the power has known literally for a millennium. But in our country, it manifested through, of course, none other than the Confederates and the plantation run capitalists that use exploitative labor in a very diabolical but yet efficient way to prey on human labor to manifest all sorts of what we called innovations that everybody in the South who wasn't black was complicit in. And quite frankly, if you think about the robber baron North, there was a lot of versions of that sort of formula as well, but only for, of course, the robber barons who were in control used manipulation and their strength to corrupt the political process, to write laws for themselves, to cheat and steal and do whatever they had to do to control the outcome. And then we actually remedied that until we didn't again. It's a whole history of the United States, and I'll go into that into a minute. But the thing that we actually have to wrap our heads around, people, is the real threat of Donald Trump winning the 2024 election, even though we've seen him indicted on 91 charges of grift, lies, deception, treason, criminal racketeering, and deceptive acts and practices in a myriad of ways that in any normal part of American society, there would never be a snowball's chance in hell for somebody this disgusting and this antithetical to the American experience of integrity and character, that we would have literally tens of millions of people unapologetic or unafraid to show their made in China MAGA hats, because here's the whole key. They're all in on it. They believe that's the way this thing should work. Very similar to the plantation capitalism, where everybody who was in on it got a piece of it as long as they could victimize the other. Oh, yeah, that's what these guys are all about. I would bet, if I did the research and I had the wherewithal to be able to get all of the numbers, I would bet that a large percentage of MAGA supporters are people in the housing industry who use grift and every which way of manner of predation to maintain their business model, particularly through deception, which I'm an expert in, and I know exactly how these guys do it, which is why it's all laid out in my work. That is the only way to penetrate this amalgamation and this abomination that are the ocean of lies and madness that have overcome America's ability to discern and to somehow deconstruct and defrag their minds from manipulation, deception, and propaganda. I bet you I want to say things that are probably inappropriate, but I'll just let you infer what I'm, using as an analogy. But I'll bet just about everything that most supporters of Donald Trump are looking to make a quick buck through shortcuts, through lies and deception to play a game. And here's the key consideration, which is absolutely hilarious and disgusting at the same time. They're all socialists. And they're not socialists in the way where they're thinking about harmony and workers' rights and everybody is equal, and they're going to try to, create a workers' co-op where everybody has a say and that the system works for the betterment of most people. No, that's not their version of socialism. Their version of socialism is to extract, is to exploit, but most importantly, to use socialism from our central bank illegally to guarantee criminality. Did you follow that? Well, again, if you want it laid out completely, it's in the con. A project that took us years and years and years and millions of dollars to get all of the existential truths to put it together in a very cohesive way for you to understand the ABCs of massive corruption. And the Khan reveals the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that never ended, which I say is our system. So there's this battle out there, between capitalism and communists and socialists and ideological sort of deviations of all of it in everybody's discussion or argument, or depending on whom you are we going to fight fascism? Are we fascist? Are we going to communist? What does that mean? All of these other things, which are just basically shards and fractured ecosystems of silos that this insidious system has created because the billionaires are in complete control. Because the billionaires literally spend billions to loot trillions. And that's the theory that I'm going to relate to you, to impress upon you, to reveal to you in this truth bomb riff, that hopefully is going to finally get you to act, to get you to understand what's at stake, to get you to understand how these diabolical and betrayal machinery and mechanics work. And the nature of everything that's in our face at every given moment. I'm just going to take a quick, sort of rip from the headlines to kind of get us into this conversation a little bit more thoroughly. But let's take Elon Musk, for example. Elon Musk bought Twitter, supposedly to be able to create free speech. Now, anybody who knows the system and experience and observed what you've seen on Twitter since Elon took over and then, did the brand change to X. But from the very beginning, particularly from the Twitter files, there was this offensive move to put the previous owners and I guess board of directors and the culture on the defense because Jack Dorsey had censored, let's call it, Donald Trump. And by taking Donald Trump off of Twitter because of it becoming a sort of echo chamber of disinformation and hate and all things that led to the insurrection and all of the things that go with the Donald Trump presidency of 5,000 plus lives, of things that he did that were literally insane, particularly in the aftermath, as it results in, and I'm not even going to go into the impeachment trials and what didn't happen after that took place, but ultimately into the revelation that his son-in-law and his former Treasury Secretary were on the hook with Saudi Arabia, where they've now realized over $6 billion in investment, which is the most grotesque abomination of corruption that a very few people that understand are willing to discuss, among other things. But going back to Elon Musk, Elon Musk professes free speech. He's going to let everybody do their thing and, no censorship and everything else. But what's the first thing that really starts to manifest through trending? Well, a whole lot of anti-Semitism, particularly Kanye West. And that has existed ever since, and before that, in nodes that have been increased infinitum. Now, this on top of like what I would explain or describe as the trollbot circus, which seems to me to be whatever the KGB did and whatever their abbreviation of the the tech sector that was working all over social media back in 2016 during the Donald Trump campaign, where everybody was getting played, where they were playing Black Lives Matter against MAGA and all that sort of thing, that created all sorts of this is just how it's done in intelligence, because if you can create basically wars amongst the people, then you can manipulate them. And this is what the CIA and the KGB have been doing ever since the Cold War. There's no question about it. But in the case of Elon Musk, here's this guy that I put on the highest of the high, of the highest pedestal imaginable, because for the last 10 years, the thing that I actually have been striving for is the day that I could purchase my candy red apple Tesla X, and put all my killer gear, like my Blizzard skis, or my Libtech snowboard, or my longboard, or my Santa Cruz bike and, just live the life and then plaster on my Red Hot Chili Pepper sticker and live in my fabulous geothermal house that has solar off the grid in great mountain towns and on the coast so I can surf and snowboard the rest of my life. Yeah, that was my vision. And I thought that Elon Musk was this sort of second coming, if you will, but the guy that was, evolving paradigm change because of all of the things that Tesla was able to achieve through this fantastic technology and then also the vision and the infrastructure. I remember going to Tesla dealerships when they first started laying out these fantastic interactive videos about what the percentage of emissions that a full-on transportation sector on electric could potentially manifest. Not to mention show you and the people in the dealerships what exactly at that time period, and now I'm talking about 2014, 15 through 17, what the actuality of our current emissions were and where it was coming from in each state and what the rules and the regulations were that the electric industry was up against. It was a magnificent dynamic orchestration of how you need to be able to see and understand how things are, because we have a system that provides energy and electricity that creates the energy that we need for a modern society that, creates all sorts of emissions, which of course Saudi Arabia has, I don't know, let's call it the 747 cockpit version of the economy on a global scale because they're the ultimate swing producer and that the dollar is attached to it and everything that comes with on global economies. But what was really fascinating over the course of the last several years when Elon Musk came into power, and I got to be honest with you, the first time I actually got a little bit suspicious of Elon was, I think it was 2017, and it made sense to me that Elon attended what seemed to be kind of like this Knights of the Round Table business sector meeting at all things Trump Tower. And I was like, wow, I guess it's somewhat opportunistic for Elon to play the game, to come into power. To stay at the table of power, because I knew at that time the United States government had a huge interest and influence in supporting Tesla's rise in infrastructure. And that's another reason why I was so gung-ho about Tesla, because it's American made. And, Tesla was one of my all-time favorite people in history for all things that he discovered and pronounced, which has always brought a lot of question marks to it as well. But here Elon was as a sort of partner with the United States government that was moving forward with this kind of private public partnership. And I already was aware of Elon and his brother's relationship and how they created PayPal and what that led to and tech and all that sort of thing. And I knew that Elon was an extraordinary engineer and that, they were doing things and just seeing things and creating things that were just, I thought, magnificent, and proving that, the energy and the performance and everything was more robust and better, achieving than what the alternatives were with the fossil fuel industry and all things, the combustible engine, which was technology for the last 150 years. Obviously, it's gotten much better, and I was impressed with watching the Formula One race in Vegas over the weekend. But these were the things that were what I was just like, yes, there's a chance that we can break through all of this stuff and we can get to the next level, and Elon's making it happen, which of course gave me my vision of my fantasy to have this Tesla X and the lifestyle with my Red Hot Chili Pepper sticker on the back of it, which would be the personification of who I am. But here I am in 2023 watching Elon Musk literally implode with all sorts of cliche, ridiculous stunts, whether it was him down the border talking about immigration with his cowboy hat on, acting like he's a sheriff with his glasses on and his sunglasses on and his rifle, like he's this old West cowboy, which I kind of thought hilarious and appreciated at the same time, but just cracked me up. But it was all in context of this sort of thing that's important to really anybody who supports MAGA, that it's like, secure the borders. And there's a lot of reasons why we need to do that, but not with the wall and all the ways that, these guys, manifest. There's smarter ways to do it. And I used to live close to the border all the time. I grew up in Texas. I went to school in Arizona. I lived in California for a while, and yeah, man, I know Mexico and I know the border and I know that whole thing, and I grew up with it my entire life. And yeah, there's a much better way to manage the border than the stupidity that's been laid out ever since Trump's fraud, in which, of course, Steve Bannon got nailed on fraud, among other things. But here's Elon Musk, working in propping up the likes of Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is the biggest weasel scumbag worm I have ever seen in my life. Lately, I've been challenging him to a fight to the octagon. I hope I get, yeah, Joe Rogan's, attention, and I'd like to get in the ring with the guy and just go bare knuckle. To be honest with you, there's few people on this planet that I despise more than Tucker Carlson. The guy's a freak show. He's this make believe, like what? I mean, I'm sure he's smart enough to get through however he got through because he probably got special placement in the Ivy League at Yale and everything else because his family was super rich and they probably had contacts. And he goes through and he's smart enough to, kind of learn the what everybody learns, especially at a higher level of education, is how to be able to argue both sides of whatever. And throughout the years, Tucker did some interesting things. Like he did some good stuff on private equity. I always enjoyed his fun stuff on UFOs. But in terms of these other sorts of scenarios, he was really running this gauntlet at Fox where he seemed to be super involved with all things that would be Trump / white supremacy / whatever relationship with Putin. And there's a lot there, by the way. Much more than one of my former heroes who's gone nut job as well, a guy by the name of Matt Taibbi, who claims, like many others, like there's nothing to see here, Russiagate. Meanwhile, as I've said through many of these truth bombs, the direct corollary between Putin and Trump is, of course, Deutsche Bank. It's the easiest thing to see and to explain and to show in the history of the world, which ties to all things Trump fraud trial. But I'll come back to that if I have time, if I don't talk for 3 hours on this thing, because I know that nobody has the bandwidth, but I've got to get through to tens of millions of people, and we've got to come together because I'm telling you, we are on the precipice of absolute disaster if those of us who don't understand how the world works and who champion the vibrant dynamism of democracy and freedom and the integrity of law, there's no chance in hell we're not going to spin off into this madness that I think has been manipulated the whole time by billionaires, but particularly Putin and MBS of Saudi Arabia, which, if you think about this incredible picture that came from during the time of Donald Trump, where Putin and MBS were just sitting there laughing, I kept thinking to myself, my God, does a picture say 1,000 words? So here's Elon. He comes in, he supposedly buys Twitter for what, $46 billion. Most people in America think like he stroked a check. He came out of his own pocket, and he fluctuates because he's the world's richest man. He's got 250 billion, or he's worth 250 billion, and it fluctuates by 30 billion depending on what the market does pretty much every day. But the reason Elon is as incredibly wildly successful is that his company and operation somehow miraculously survived years and years of no profitability. And you got to understand, and I haven't done the mechanics and the deep dive forensics to understand who did what, when, and how to make all of this stuff happen, but it's part and parcel to everything that I've been revealing to you the whole time through the financialization of how the country and the world works, which I've got to get to the point to reveal how this whole thing works to you, but it comes compartmentalized through every piece of what it is that I'm revealing to you. So Elon's worth $250 billion plus dollars. Everybody thinks that the guy, walked in and stroked a check for $46 billion. He didn't. I guess there was even more involved with partners that I think came in with $60 billion to purchase Twitter, and who those partners were, I'm a little cloudy about because I don't have all, again, the forensic evidence, but I do know Saudi's involved. And I don't know to what end. I mean, but Saudi's involved with everything. Sports washing, if you saw the Formula One race from Vegas on Saturday and everything that entailed, I guarantee, and I saw Saudi Aramco, as one of the sponsors. Of course, Saudi's deeply involved with that. And boy, was that an expression of the whole, which is another sequence of this whole event, but this whole thing that I'm trying to reveal to you. But Elon buys Twitter and I was excited about it at the beginning. And boy, if you look back at my initial tweets, I was all over free speech and everything I'm all about. But what I discovered was the first thing that he did was exactly what he was accusing Jack Dorsey of. He began censoring, particularly yours truly. I guarantee I'm censored, and I guarantee Elon Musk knows who I am. Now, to put who I am in context to Elon Musk, just for those who like to compare, because that's how everybody seems to be and everybody wants to judge. Yeah, I told you that Elon Musk is worth 250 billion, give or take 30 billion on market fluctuations. I've got the $29 trillion truth, which is really the $33 trillion truth that has become the $70 trillion truth that runs everything that I'm revealing to you, and it's not ideology. This is by the book Forensics Evidence of A plus B equals C and how it works. And yet I can't break through the dystopia of this incredible, discombobulation of Orwellian plastic bubble between me and the people that need to hear this. It's like tens of millions of you are out there going, what the fuck is going on? And I know millions of you are more good than bad. I know that there's more good than evil in this world. I feel it in my bones. I see it in my life every day. I know that not all people who express themselves on things like X, where they can do it through some fake account and they can express the worst part of themselves, they don't espouse that and they don't expose that when they're out in public going to a sporting event, minus the people that were always booing anybody who knelt during Black Lives Matter and Colin Kaepernick, which is another piece of this story. But the long and the short of it is, I know that there are more good people than bad. Like I've expressed in many of my Truth Bomb riffs, there's two columns of our soul. There's two poles of our soul. There's a polarity. You've got character, integrity, and dignity and decency versus complicity, duplicity, and hypocrisy. And where you go depends on how you're getting paid, where you fit in the mix, where you are in your journey, and how you actually do things. I'm all about courage, character, dignity, integrity, and I always have been. And it's cost me a lot, I can tell you. But let me tell you something else. It's really, really destroyed everything I have ever been about my entire life in pursuit of the American dream, in pursuit of my career, in pursuit of my family, in pursuit of everything that is important to me. And because we are not a free market society where the billionaires have complete control of grip through everything from mainstream media, through the gatekeepers of the likes of HBO and Netflix and all of the other corporate players, and then now the independent guys that are fighting back. But if you look at the independent guys fighting back, who are they fighting back for and for what reason? If you look at Tucker Carlson and the connection between him and, of course, Russell Brand, who blows my mind that he's such an idiot. Literally, he's such a genius with linguistics and how he thinks about things and frames things. But I've seen now over and over and over, way beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he's completely on board with all things Tucker Carlson, who's nothing but a grifter, lying piece of shit weasel, who, again, I'll repeat, if Joe Rogan happens to watch this, buddy, I'd like to get into the ring with him, and I would fight him without gloves, and Elon Musk, and quite frankly, Vivek Ramaswamy, and I'll do it at the same time. I'll put that challenge out there right now. I'll fight all three of those suckers at the same exact time, and I'll pound them into oblivion because they're freaking assholes, but they are a deranged danger to what this country is for true patriots who believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that equality and upward mobility. So going back to Elon Musk, based on this insane perversion of free speech that, as it turns out, to be censorship for free speech and a platform for nothing but hate speech. Oh yeah, Elon Musk has been deeply involved with anti-Semitism from the very beginning. I don't know if it's because of his apartheid guy or where it comes from. I know his mom was this former model. It was beautiful. I guess his father was a part of the apartheid deal. I haven't really done the deep dive, unfortunately, because I've been so enamored with Elon and his engineering marvels that it never occurred to me this guy could be, and I've heard rumors of this for a long time, but I never really did the deep dive on it. I never questioned him until I saw what's been going on since he purchased X. And oh yeah, last Friday, IBM pulled advertising. Apple pulled advertising because he's supporting a meme and disinformation about anti-Semitism. And it's such a trip because, and this should really, formulate your kind of thinking about how twisted and distorted the billionaire universe is, because it was not very long that Elon was meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, And Netanyahu in Israel is way out in front of AI in terms of technology and also many other things that are probably of interest to Elon. And Israel was going to also, through these Abraham Accords, which were created during the Trump administration initially by everybody's favorite, son-in-law, who I guess looks like a Ken doll sort of thing. But he's this Jewish Machiavellian idiot who literally got billions of dollars, and I shit you not, literally and this is the biggest cliche of all, his building at 666 Park Avenue for a bailout because he was about to go bankrupt. I'm talking about Jared Kushner and his family, right? And so Jared, married to Ivanka, and then Steve Mnuchin, they're part of these Abraham Accords, and they got billions of dollars from Saudi, and they're creating this relationship of which was going to create, normalize a relationship with Israel, and Israel would become the indispensable nation to somebody like Saudi because what's important to Saudi? Well, protection through AI or misusage or manipulation of AI, which obviously Israel can deliver, not to mention all of the intelligence apparatus and probably the military sort of strong arm of what Israel has become extremely good at, which we're seeing all over Gaza, which now a lot of people are over the world are like, oh yeah, let's conflate Israel with the police state apartheid because of Gaza without really fully understanding the full story of it, even though it's complicated and who wants to see children, slaughtered and everything that comes with it, which is horrific. But at the same time, yeah, Hamas uses their children as pawns, as, human shields in hospitals to basically be able to keep their matrix hive of underground networks alive. And that's what they've invested in to make some of the leaders of Hamas live fat on the lamb, just like their predecessor, Yasser Arafat, before they broke off from, the PLO. And from what I understand, Yasser made out with billions because of the nature of how all these goons work. And there we go to corruption again. But there's a lot of interest in the Middle East that, they'll spend a lot of money on the corrupt vestiges of the people in Gaza, which, voted for Hamas to be their politically designated leadership, which is their government, and all they did was to try to create situations that will lead to October 7th, which I would not be surprised that Israel knew was coming. I don't see how they didn't, and that brings up a whole lot of questions that I haven't resolved completely, going back to Saudi and 9/11, which Saudi funded 9/11 and how it all went down. But did Saudi do it on its own? Did they direct the whole thing? You have to understand that we had knowledge of where the terrorist cells were, where they were training, what they were doing, what they were looking for. We didn't know where they were going to strike, but we knew who was funding them and where they were. And it would have taken like that to be able to take them down. And both the CIA had the information and the FBI had the information, but the powers that be and the political apparatus of corruption thwarted it from talking to each other because they wanted an outcome. Who were they? Well, the ones that are the easiest to spot when you look through the Wayback Machine was Darth Vader 1.0, Vice President Dick Cheney, who was the CEO of Halliburton and everything that comes with it, not to mention Condoleezza Rice and all of the things that they were ignoring with the information that was given to them over and over and over, that the lights were blinking red, that 9/11 was coming, but they did nothing, and then it happened, and then of course we had 20 years of war. To what end? To benefit the infrastructure, the double down and the triple down on the global oil paradigm. Now, it's so easy to see in retrospect through the rear door or through the rear mirror that the United States did not attack Saudi. We never asked questions. We suppressed it. And a lot of people in mainstream media, and this has just bugged me out from 2005 forward, because I saw it all in slow time, and nobody would ask the question, well, what about Saudi? What about Saudi? What about Saudi? And years and years and years later, we've seen Anderson Cooper for years and Rachel Maddow and everybody at Fox. So yeah, if you want the definitive, congressional investigation, look no further than the 9/11 inquiry, and the commission and the report that it gave back. Meanwhile, the guy who was actually the chair of it all, a guy out of Florida by the name of Bob Graham, he says for years and years and years later, it was all bullshit. That it was basically handcuffed by the Bush administration and they couldn't go into Saudi. They couldn't reveal all. There was the 26 redacted pages that showed up on a Friday, 20 years later in the New York Times that was poo-pooed, that Saudi didn't really have any connection to it. What? Are you kidding me? Of course they did. Who did what, when, and how do they do it? Come on. And then we end up with, we've had people asking questions forever, in this war on terror, which of course many people are asking now because of what's going on in Gaza and everything else. And a lot of people want to, wring their hands of the relationships of what we did and the mistakes that we did after 9/11. which, of course, Biden was warning Israel. But the bottom line is, it's like, no, it achieved exactly what it's meant to, which was corruption. Who benefited? The military-industrial complex through the contractors. And let me tell you, I have been to Chevy Chase, Maryland. I've been to Potomac, Maryland. I've been in the neighborhoods where these rich estates, with these guys that have got houses bigger than the big oil barons down in Texas and Dallas and Houston and River Oaks and whatever. I think of that huge neighborhood with the huge monster houses in Dallas, that are all oil based, right? It's just like that for the military industrial complex and the contractors. Let me tell you, there's some big time money in looting the Pentagon. Okay, so what do? We just basically had 20 years of war where we used our military to basically, do the smackdown. And originally, when we went into Iraq, my philosophy of the whole thing was, wow, this is interesting. What we're going to do is we wanted to get rid of Saddam for a lot of real, reasons and a lot of things that made sense, but not, in my estimation, because Bush too was like, Daddy got embarrassed by Saddam, and so we got to, clean up that mess and that all personal strife and everything else. No, it was like, if you look at the backers of who the Bush administration was and everybody that was involved, it was mostly the military-industrial complex, financial fossil fuel complex, and really all the power players, right? They're the ones who bucked up W, right? And so we end up with 20 years of war, where we send our troops to Afghanistan and Iraq, and yet no question of Saudi Arabia. Okay, well, we know that Iraq has huge oil fields, and okay, so that was a part of it. We've always known that oil was a big part of every war that we've been on for a very long time. But Afghanistan, it was interesting because it was like, okay, we've gone in there, the place went insanely corrupt. We played ball with the guys that we were supposed to, basically take out, the Taliban. And we gave them more power, and we spent billions upon billions of dollars. I remember there were stories of suitcases and probably, trainloads of cash that were spent all over Afghanistan. And we put these warlords up in these huge monster houses, and they have complete control of the deal. And we were there the whole time, basically feeding the military-industrial machine. And there's this great documentary on Netflix, which is like, 9/11, 20 years after, and they interviewed all of these, troops that were in Afghanistan that had served, 2, 3, 4, 5 tours of duty. And they're like, what are we doing here? Nobody even knows what we're doing here. We don't even have an objective. We're just here to what? Placate this situation where everybody's getting paid except for us. And so then we finally get out of, Afghanistan, last year. And then the next thing you know, we've got this full-on potential third world war that's manifesting out of what's happening in Gaza. And, meanwhile, the whole time, I thought that we had gotten all of our troops out of Iraq. Turns out we still have bases in Iraq. And it turns out I had no idea we had a footprint in Syria. Oh, yeah, we have a footprint in Syria. We have a military base in Syria. Why is that relevant to the whole thing that we're talking about? Well, because as I'm piecemealing this, and let's do the quick rewind on how I introduced this whole thing. Elon Musk, who is a recipient of all sorts of United States largesse to help manifest a paradigm change in Tesla, and then ultimately, which was on the front page of the New York Times today, I think it's called Space Shield, and also, of course, SpaceX, where he's this private partnership, that Elon's supposedly doing things more efficiently than I guess NASA would. But look what he's done in the interim. What did we just see, 3 or 4 months ago? As the owner of Starlink, Elon Musk personally put his thumb on the war with Russia and Ukraine by preventing the Ukrainian military from talking to each other in the theater of combat. Why might that be? And what does Russia have that Elon might be interested in? I'm not really sure, but I think I've heard, and this is speculation on my part, but raw materials that are probably needed in Elon's vertical for the electric revolution, I would imagine, or maybe other elements that I don't, right? And I know that there's a big find down in the Salton Sea where there's a lot of it'll come back to me what's really important for the batteries, lithium, I guess, lithium ion and that sort of thing. But these are all raw materials that need to be used in this process. And so, Elon, and we've seen this over the years where, billionaires and people who get so insanely rich where, there is nothing that can hold them accountable, they go freaking nuts. And I think in a weird way, that's what's happening with Elon. So Elon is involved with all of these strange characters, whether it's, and I haven't seen a direct correlation to Putin, but I have seen a direct correlation to MBS, but yet I don't know exactly why that benefits. But we know, I think the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund was an investor in X, and I know they sit on the board, and whomever that might be. And there's reasons for that. And then Saudi's been involved with sports washing the whole time. But MBS, I want to be absolutely clear about this. MBS, the leader, the presumed leader, the guy who's going to be the future king of Saudi Arabia, this guy had nothing to do with 9/11 that I can tell. Khashoggi, yeah. 9/11, no. 9/11 was a separate situation. But as far as I can tell, MBS is playing ball with China. He's playing ball with everybody, really. He's trying to, I don't know, is he trying to be cute to prove that he's got more leverage over the United States than anybody can possibly imagine? Because if you understand that, for example, our entire infrastructure, our financial infrastructure, was all over the Saudi Aramco, which is the largest IPO ever offered in 2018, 2019, and not to mention the all of the huge apparatus and the apparatchik of companies and universities and everybody else that depend on the largesse from the Saudis. He knows that all of our power structure is leveraged on Saudi money. Not to mention the world's global being the global reserve currency, which we went off the gold standard in 1971 and got on the commoditization of the oil standard at that time period. And that's what this is all about. And so that's the other piece of the puzzle. So Saudi and Elon are manipulating X to create, the world's supposed, I don't know, what does Elon call it? Like the town square, right? But yet manipulating anybody who isn't on team fascism or hatred or religious theocracy or any sort of sex bot or hate troll. He basically suppresses us, and especially somebody who has a truth that is monumentally bigger than, if this is a comparison of dick size, for example, there's 1,000 billion and a trillion. I've got the $70 trillion truth. Starts with a $33 trillion truth in 2009. And then it went snowball, Richter crazy over the course of the last 13 to 15 years based on everything that I'm revealing to you. But Saudi Arabia, Elon Musk, the nature of everything that's going on, and then ultimately this move of Trump in midst of everything that has been proven that he's in the midst of. The guy is a treasonous bastard who lies, steals, and cheats, switches the blame his entire career, and all these maggots are eating it up because they do the same thing. Like I said at the beginning of this, I think I said at the beginning of this, maybe I was thinking about it. I've talked about a lot of stuff so far. That most of these maggots, if I were able to do a deep dive and really find a percentage of who's behind this, particularly the money, I guarantee you, I would find that a lot of these guys are tied to the housing industry. They like to flip houses. They like to use deceptive acts and practices to move this thing through the system, to get their fees, to move it all forward, whether it's commercial real estate, whether it's anything else. And what the last thing they want is regulation. Why? Because that would prevent the whole thing. Now, here's the whole thing that I said about that all of MAGAs are socialists, ironically and disgustingly. Why? Because, and this was illuminated just recently, and I've done it in all of my work, but it was on the front page of the New York Times last week on this opinion section, and yet this is reiterating everything that I show you in my work at The Con, which is at www.thecon.tv, and also in my podcast called The New Untouchables, which reveals all of this stuff, not to mention my 425 truth bomb riffs on Patrick Level Truth Bombs The Con. And what happens is that based on this guy who just, sends this message to Wall Street and anybody who's listening, and he's like this financier in the housing industry, and he's saying, we've got to have the Fed reintroduce quantitative easing, which is socialism. What is socialism in this context? Well, first of all, you got to understand that what his argument is that we've got to create an incentive or stimulus for the housing market, or it's going to implode. That the lights are blinking red, that everybody who's in on housing after everything that we pumped up over the last couple of years, especially like 2 years ago, where prices went through the roof, not to mention rents and not to mention, property and commercial real estate, even though there's no demand, it's all predicated on these games of manipulation through what we call control fraud. And what is control fraud? Well, control fraud is the way, first of all, accountants and appraisers hyperinflate the appraised value of a piece of real estate. Does that sound familiar for anybody who's tracking on the Trump fraud scheme? It's what he's done his entire career. So why do you do that? Well, because you want to hyperinflate the asset to get more and more loans. Well, who's actually doing something illegal in that particular capacity? Is it Donald Trump, who is lying on the value of his property? Not to mention just how stupid it is. He quadrupled or tripled the size of his penthouse in one of his Trump towers by like 3 times. And it's so easy to go figure it out. All you got to do is get access. And how large is the property? Well, and he increased it threefold. Why? Because he wanted to say it was worth more so he could get more loans. Well, why does he want to get more loans? But more particularly, why would a bank loan under those circumstances? Well, it's called control fraud. Well, who orchestrates the control fraud and for what outcome? Well, if you pull it back, and this is what we show you in the con, and this is the whole blueprint of how this whole thing works, is that banks make their money from lending money. And in the past, you would think that's because banks make money when they get paid back with interest. But there's been a slight variation to that model over the course of the last 30 years, but primarily since late 1998 onward, that has manifested what we call perverse incentives for the modern executive compensation. So you've heard many people say and decry, right, that CEOs get paid 3,500 times more than the average employee today. I know it's like 500 times to many more times than that. But the long and the short of it is the CEOs get incentivized to create, more and more profit per quarter so that they get bonuses predicated on that. Well, how do you do that if you make money from loans? Well, the idea is that loans are written and underwritten to people who can afford to pay them back. So you're going to realize and mitigate the risk. You're going to realize the return and mitigate the risk. And that goes all into whatever the interest rate is and what the fees that are involved are and so on and so forth. And so when CEOs at the head of these large financial behemoths, and let's start with the 2 big to fail banks like Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, who am I missing? There's a handful of others. That their bonuses and their board's bonuses and everybody throughout the system are predicated on the number. That everybody in the food chain this isn't the commercial banking side where you put your deposits, you put your money, maybe they make slight interest on savings and everything that you might have in there. But that's one side of it, and the money you can get from the ATMs and the fees and all that sort of thing. But the other side of it is fees for, 1, mergers and acquisitions, which is a different business model, but 2, from modern executive compensation based on control fraud. So they have to increase the volume of loans. The way they do that is to have increase appraisal loan value so that they can hyperinflate the asset so that they can create loan to value ratios that encourage what we call the high yield spread premium that all of the brokers in the food chain get paid on to create those loan values and to flip and so on and so forth. And so you want to create as many loans as possible. That's going to create 3 sure things. It's going to create immediate profits for the CEOs based on deceptive acts and practices, which are fake loans based on fake appraisal fraud, but max volume where everybody's getting paid because they're not getting paid on the performance of the loan. They're getting paid on the investment in those loans because they're showing hyperinflated profits that are built on deceptive acts and practices, which are fraud. And fraud is illegal deception or theft by deception. So they do this in mass to where they get more and more volumes. And there's three things that are going to happen besides the CEOs getting paid, massive, massive returns, which makes them incredibly rich. But the firms are going to explode. They're gonna fail. That's what we learned during the savings and loan crisis of the late 80s, early 90s, and that was Act One of what became the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, which was the largest global conspiracy of racketeering in the history of the world, which is now our system. Why? Because instead of the nature of what capitalism's supposed to be, which is risk reward, what happened is we had this insane, what they call, I'll come back to it in a minute, but you can fill in the blanks. I mean, there's a moral hazard, but moral hazard is a polite way of saying theft by deception for goons of racketeering, which is the mob. And ultimately what they did was, when the whole global world fell apart as a result of this, so consider the net value of everything that Fani Willis is suing Donald Trump for $250 million, which sounds like a big rung of money compared to what this guy might have been worth at 4.5 billion at one point, 3.5 billion, which is all predicated on the value of what his real estate is worth. And interestingly enough, going back to Saudi, the Trump card that Trump actually had was like, yeah, we were hyperinflating all of the values of our asset, not because the nature of what the free market would bring in, but what I could get from Saudi Arabia through money laundering, and quite frankly, Putin and some others, right? All these high-end mega oligarchs throughout the world that exploit and extract all this capital and all of this funding from their own countries, and they threw it into Western real estate, of which Trump was a big vector for some of these clowns, but the whole world and just the entire real estate market. And so when the whole thing imploded, there was like a $4.5 trillion figure for the entirety of the United States real estate market in 2005, 6-ish. But what we had in derivatives trades predicated on this whole thing, which we show you again in the con, was $600 to $800 trillion. And the entirety of the entire global economy blew up, seized, fell, and everybody at the time was like, oh yeah, it's a problem with liquidity. So what happened? The Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, leapt into motion. They had 98 private meetings behind the scene between then Secretary of the Treasury, John Paulson, who came out of Goldman Sachs before he went to work for Bush, which was the exact same thing that Clinton got with Robert Rubin, who came out of the Goldman Sachs and went to into his Secretary of the Treasury. So it was a continuation of this whole thing, and many, many others kind of fit in this whole revolving door scenario. But because of all of the laws and the deregulation that they created, manifested this scenario where we, through modern executive compensation, a perverse incentive, created a global contagion of fraudulent securities that were all sawdust. Now, The Big Short, the movie by Brad Pitt and Plan B and Christian Bale and all the great people associated with that, told you that much of the story. I'm telling you the entire story, and there's so much more. But the long and the short of it is, so the Federal Reserve circled the wagons, had 98 private meetings behind the scenes, and there's a thing called the full faith and credit of the United States. And that's manifested through a pipeline which we call Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which enables the government to be the lender of last resort, which makes sense when you're a superpower like the United States. If you engage in a nuclear war and you engage in some massive, let's think downstream that the whole world's going to be toxic, and so they'll probably just take that money to feed it to billionaires like they already are, so that they can go live up on Elon Musk's Mars, which might be what they're actually doing, but that's besides the fact. The fact of the matter is, we put $33 trillion in 2009. Again, let me remind you, Elon Musk's net worth is $250 billion today. Let's say there's 1,000 billion and a trillion. This was 33 trillion in 2009. We did it again in 2019. We did it throughout COVID, and now we're going to do it again by what comes next, until I can reach tens of millions of you to understand this is why we've got this carnage, and we've got this battle between what I call the new robber barons and the new Confederacy. And the new Confederacy is all things Trump, but he's tied to all things authoritarian. You remember he likes, Kim Il-jung in North Korea, kiss the ring there. Those guys are involved with all sorts of money laundering and drug laundering and all sorts of shit to manifest what they do for Kim Il-jung was whole country suffers. Meanwhile, same with Putin, because Trump was on the receiving end of laundering the whole time, and MBS and all of the things that they want to do with the BRIC countries, even though they're all completely hooked up on the central bank and they're all playing it. So this is ultimately my theory at the end here, and what I'm trying to get to is that Donald Trump has got huge, big money backers, and those big money backers have got an influence on the courts. Donald Trump, as we just saw last week, from Sam Bankman-Fried, the guy that stole and looted, $10 billion from his clients at SBF or FTX, because crypto is all a bunch of bullshit. But the long and the short of it is, he got busted, he got nailed, with 7 counts of fraud that a jury found him guilty of, and he's going to, maybe go to jail. I mean, the maximum sentence is 115 years, but that happened in less than a year. Donald Trump has been doing this sort of thing for over 4 decades, and much, much more. The stuff that he was involved with in the 70s with the 5 mob families, yada, 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 which includes Giuliani, all things with RICO, which is a trip in its own right. But the long and the short of it is that when Donald Trump was coming up, man, it was crazy, because I kept, my theory was we had 2 things happening at the same time. Many, many things happening at the same time. First of all, Bernie Sanders was calling Wall Street's business model fraud. Then Donald Trump started plagiarizing Bernie and saying he was going to drain the swamp. Meanwhile, Bernie never called out exactly what the fraud is, which is what I'm revealing to you. And Donald Trump put all of the purveyors of this fraud at the apex of this situation, exactly like Obama did. Obama did the exact same thing, which is what made Trump inevitable. And so when the powers that be, because Putin, by the way, has been a KGB guy, and he's a squirrely, smart, clever, probably relentless, and just insane danger for a lot of reasons, but he's also a danger to himself and the country of Russia, because he's been extracting the whole time, and we know what happens in Russia after things get to a certain point. I don't know how close we are to that point. It might be pretty close, but he's still in control. And the long and the short of it is, that guy, when he came out of the KGB before actually Yeltsin, right about this time period in the late 90s, there was a big to-do about the initial derivatives company that were all of these quants, these geniuses that were doing all these derivatives trades on the Russian ruble, where they created a run on the Russian ruble that basically bankrupted the Soviet Union. Yeah, it wasn't really it was a combination of race to the military supremacy and all of those things that were happening in the Cold War, but it was ultimately because of the derivatives trades, just like what blew us up in 2008. But that blew up the Russian ruble in 1998, 7, maybe 1998, with what we call long-term capital management. And Putin knew the whole fucking thing. And by the way, Matt Taibbi was in Russia at that time period doing heroin, because he was like this gonzo journalist. And I think Russia has something on Matt Taibbi, which I think is part and parcel to this whole thing with, quite frankly, Taibbi and the Twitter files and Elon Musk. I think Taibbi got paid. I really do. I think Taibbi threw up his arms. They had information on him. He knew that nothing was going to change how this whole power appatrique works. And I think he got on board to do his thing. And I've watched him evolve into this weird personality with Glenn Greenwald and, all of the people that I've got, Russell Brand and Jimmy Dore and all of these guys. And of course, Aaron Mate and, Max Blumenthal, who are all sympathetic to Russia and Putin because of Ukraine. And I think they were all on the take. I really honestly do. They were involved because they're all bootlickers for Tucker. And don't forget who's involved with Tucker as well. RFK Jr. And there's even more, right? And Steve Bannon, okay? I mean, this is this crazy sort of centrifugal force. And as we're moving towards the 2024 election, and all of this stuff has been happening for decades in the evolution of this whole thing. But when you understand that the Federal Reserve looted the full faith and credit of the United States to pay what was a massive global racketeering enterprise premised through Wall Street that got away with trillions upon trillions of dollars for destroying the middle class of America, for destroying the pensioners. What happened in the aftermath of that was a lot of those people were so fed up with the system that they went to MAGA. And I know none of this stuff was created by Donald Trump. He's not that smart. I think it's the wheelhouse, the spoke is Steve Bannon and his whole fourth turning situation. And he's connected to all of the billionaires on the right side, which are all the modern day John Birch Society, the Mercers, Sheldon Adelson, of course, and there's a whole connection with Israel there. and then the most beguiling and the most probably dangerous is Eric Prince and the whole Blackwater scenario. So when the January 6th commission went inside the January 6th, coup d'etat and everything that they're revealing to us, minus why all of the power structure of the United States that could have squashed the J6 insurrection in a nanosecond, whether it was SWAT, whether it was the National Guard, whether it was the FBI, whether it was, let's call it, whoever was in that corridor, could have shown up in a second and they should have slammed MAGA. But instead, MAGA walked the fucking halls of Congress the way they wanted to, created this whole shit show that I guarantee that some of these players had an involvement with, because how do the cops and all the special forces guys wind up in Washington, D.C. on their own time, and where do they get the courage to just walk in? Because somebody told them that we were going to cover them, which is somebody inside the whole apparatus of power. Because there's no way in hell this could have happened, just like 9/11 could not have happened without somebody on the inside allowing it to happen, which is exactly what happened in the 2008 great financial crisis. How do I know? Watch The Con, www.thecon.tv. Every whistleblower and courageous person at every level told all the bosses and the people in the SEC and all of the people that needed to listen, the FCIC, they all needed to understand what happened. And what do? They quashed it. Because it's our system. Now here's where we are, because of all of this stuff has gone absolutely insane. We're in this situation right now where, if you understand that, what does Saudis play? What does Russia's play? What if they had an insider with Donald Trump that could control the system with corrupt courts and judges? And again, I got to, remind you that what have we seen with the Supreme Court? We've seen Harlan Crow as a front guy that controlled Clarence Thomas. Okay, that's called corruption. Then we had the same thing with Judge Alito. Who was his benefactor? I know that guy, Leonard Leo, was involved, and there's several other billionaire apparatuses. These guys are incredibly smart. The Koch brothers, they've been at it from the very beginning. This is a coup d'etat, but guys, understand this. The true coup d'etat was in 2009 after Barack Obama, the African American who actually should have saved America, not to mention all of the things that happened to African Americans, because 55% of African American household wealth that had been increased since the horrors of Jim Crow and slavery and everything else that got us through redlining to ultimately manifest an opportunity for the American dream themselves, which is a big, big part of the African American experience and extremely important to them. But they all got set up. Didn't matter who they were, what education they had, they all got set up. I've got proof of that in spades. Go to the New Untouchables. Check out my 11-hour pilgrimage to Washington, D.C., which was like, which I call, God, what was it? 11/1/22. I can't even think of the name of it. If you go to Truth Bomb, Patrick Level, Truth Bombs The Con, and you look at live and you go down, I think it's got like 3.4 thousand views or something like that. That reveals everything I'm telling you and then some from all of the sources. Okay? So the nature and the magnitude of the moment with the 2024 election, with the courts being corrupt, with Donald Trump not going to prison for everything he did, when we've seen just recently that Sam Bankman-Fried is going to jail like that because he's not a part of the club. Donald Trump's not a part of the club, but those guys were relentless enough and smart enough to get enough judges in the system to be able to play defense against taking Trump out with the law. And we're seeing that especially in West Palm Beach, Florida, with Judge Eileen Cannon, who's like pushing the thing back until the election. And if Trump wins, then he can expunge himself from everything, right? In the nature of Fani Willis saying that she's not going to be able to bring these RICO charges in the actual trial against Trump until 2025. They're moving slower than molasses. And why is that? Because there's guys on the inside that want this outcome because the money wins. Now, I'm going to give you guys a couple of pop culture references because I thought this might be useful when before I pushed play and I was thinking about this. So my favorite series, bar none, that I think does the best sort of justice to encapsulate and do this performative, fusion of psychology and history and incentives and all of those things that make history what it is none other than Game of Thrones. And in that whole, if you're familiar with Game of Thrones, the characters that I'm most associated with in the way that I think would be Arya Stark and the Hound. That's whose side I was on, Jon Stark and Daenerys Targaryen and the whole thing. But yeah, just in terms of my life and what I had to go through to get here and everything and what I'm thinking about and everything, I think a lot like Arya Stark and the Hound. Okay. On HBO, also, they've had several other very successful series. One, Succession, that has kind of a modern, look at it, which I, kind of in a different view, but in terms of the arc, with the same, human character traits of how things work in society. Yeah, money wins, right? And I think they did a fantastic depiction. I think very probably parallel to what the Rupert Murdoch Fox empire is all about. I think they probably pretty nailed it. So, between those two, pretty spot on. A third one that I was watching recently that has a lot of corollaries, but it's very indicative and reflective of the situation I'm in. So we have the Gilded Age, and it's more like it has this opening that it has a similarity and a vibe to Game of Thrones, the way they kind of project what the story is and everything else. But the way the actual execution is more from a female sort of look at how to deal with domestic sort of interactions and perception, and don't forget perception is reality, and power, and how to play the domestic families within the context of what their husband robber barons were in the midst of. I would have preferred to see what the husband robber barons were more in the midst of, and I'm only up to season 2. I don't even know how many seasons there are, but I think they've done a really great job, though, again, sowing these seeds of like the psychology of conformity and complicity, and why do people do certain things within power to be able to manifest outcomes. And money is the ultimate resource for everything. Well, really for all of us. It's the lifeblood. And so to go back to the historical juxtaposition, that's the way it's always been throughout history. That's how monarchies operate. That's how we had serfdom. That's how we had the verticals of plantation and any other sort of bondage throughout history. And then because of the New Enlightenment thinkers, and by the way, I did hear something very interesting, and I want to kind of correlate, bring this into the corollary, because I heard this yesterday on this crazy cool podcast with this nutty, of all things, philosopher who pins himself as a Stalinist, who in a million years I wouldn't want to listen to, but I did, and boy was he a clever guy. And I'll just say this for the outset: I am not a communist, never will be, never ever ever think about that as is a potential way to run society. Ideologically, I'm more to a social democratic sort of safety net, but capitalism has to work at certain levels because of the nature of innovation. And yeah, you have to have competition, and you have to have the best and a reward and all of these other things. But it's such a trip within this context, and I'll bring it back full circle. So I started off with the Gilded Age, right? And the psychology of control based on perception for power and leverage, and using people against other outcomes, people for an outcome, and all of those sorts of things, because it's called power, and power is used by leverage. And so the masters of this game in 2023, and have been since the late 70s, maybe even the 50s, quite frankly, are the two superpowers through their intelligence mechanisms, the CIA for the United States, and of course the KGB for Russia. And they use leverage, and they use scenarios to be able to set people in sex traps, to be able to get people of importance and leverage, and to create certain outcomes. You can see this whole thing manifest. And this, I'm not sure what the connection might be, and I'm going to kind of explore this, but Mossad with Jeffrey Epstein and ultimately Donald Trump. I see all the time on X that all of these freaking morons in MAGA that are the zombie apocalypse, saying things along the lines of, look, here's evidence of how disgusting and despicable the left is because of Jeffrey Epstein and all things that are involved with that. Meanwhile, they never even go to, and I'm surprised that they don't, to my favorite producer before he decided to be exposed, and he didn't decide to expose himself, but Weinstein. I mean, two Jews that are very disappointing to me, that Weinstein was the greatest producer with his projects, but ultimately the way he did his stuff behind the scenes was horrific. He usually leveraged and raped everybody for leverage, just like I'm talking about in Epstein, who was involved and stuck to the hip with Donald Trump. Donald Trump got his wife from Epstein, not to mention he was providing talent, let's say, for Epstein's vertical. But why did they do that? They got all of these engineers and these software guys and these global geniuses and Bill Gates and everybody else, and they got them down to Epstein Island to do what? To leverage them. It's the oldest trick in the book. You got to get leverage on these guys, embarrassing stuff, so you can get what you want out of that. That's what the KGB does. That's what the CIA does. That's what Mossad did. So I'm not sure exactly how that's all going to play out in the end, but I will tell you that the top banker of the United States, Jamie Dimon, who's been at the core of all of this stuff for now, let's say, I'm going to say at least 25 years. And there's more to learn from Jamie Dimon than anybody else, but people don't go to Jamie Dimon. He's protected in this whole niche by his, bank's involvement and complicity in all things Epstein. And they're deeply involved, and that's not even a part of the dialogue. But going back to the fascism that's coming from this system. So here comes this strong arm around the world where all of these autocrats and fascism is everywhere. And yeah, it's a little bit ironic and not lost on me, but yet at the same time, it's really genius in terms of the intelligence to be able to get the far left and the far right together to be anti-Semitic in a way that is also both simultaneously supportive of Israel, but at the same time trying to destroy Israel, which is kind of the nature of the history of anti-Semitism, if you want to know the truth. But when you get into this sort of scenario, it's like, okay, Elon Musk, anti-Semitism, involved with Saudi Arabia, potentially Putin. Why is he in this situation where the United States government is investing everything in all of his tech, which goes to like Starlink and Star, whatever the protection racket is, where he's actually in being able to manipulate outcomes, not to mention ultimately what could happen in the United States. My whole thing is this, people, that if you can control the central bank of the United States for yourself, where you extract through grift the manifestations of trillions of dollars, then you buy the courts, you buy the government, you buy the media, and that's what I'm fighting. Because I have the information to take it all down. Who am I? My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm a family guy. I believe in life, liberty, and justice for all. I believe in dynamism. I believe my favorite sports are football. I love all sports. I love competition and the best triumph. What would we do in the United States? And we have examples of this, so we already have the answer, but it's a rhetorical question. What do you do if you find out that the Super Bowl was rigged and you find out who rigged it? Do you think we'd let that stand, or do you think we'd fix it and we'd get some accountability and some people would really be screwed? Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to do to these bastards that have undermined and completely betrayed everything we are as a nation built on separation of powers, on a nation built of the accountability and integrity of law. So what am I proposing? Well, I'm not proposing the guillotine because I know what happened in the Reign of Terror. I know what happened in the Russian Revolution. And here's another thing that I'll say to all of the not the Bolsheviks. Are they the one? Yeah, the Bolsheviks and the Marxists and everything else that are now finding themselves on the other far left of anti-Semitism. You know what I found out yesterday in one of these, like I just prefaced it earlier, this incredible podcast with this, self-professed Stalin philosopher that was really witty as hell and smart as they come about many, many things, even though I don't agree with his ultimate outcome and where he wants to go. But he said that, and this was news to me, that Lenin's Politburo was staffed with Jews. That's interesting to me. Marxist, of course, was Jewish. Now it kind of goes to this perspective of like, oh yeah, they were a threat to the Nazis in a sense, because the Nazis were like, fuck the Jews who have control over finances, the way they were looking at it. And, and Hitler had his personal views because his former art teacher was Jewish. And then, of course, there was anti-Semitism throughout Europe and everything else, for a millennium. And boy, is that an interesting situation. But yeah, for the Marxists, Jews created Marxism. Marx was a Jew, not to mention Lenin's cabinet or, his Politburo were filled with Jews. I was like, that was interesting because Stalin, of course, then turned the reins of terror on Jews as well. There's probably not a whole lot of room between anti-Semitism of Stalin and Hitler, to be quite frank with you. And now we are here on these doorsteps of all of this calamity that is manifesting because of what I'm revealing to you. Because if there is a World War III, for example, let's say, and I'm surprised it already hasn't happened yet, but because of Gaza, because of the horrific nature of what's happening in Gaza, and especially children being slaughtered and put all over the front pages and social media and everything else, even though they're being used as shields to hide these complexes and all of these horrible things that are happening in Gaza. What happens if Iran steps in and there's a wider regional conflict and things spin out of control and we have a World War III, which would be probably there's more at stake on the table now and many more tripwires than existed during what tripwired World War I, for example. And then suddenly we're in this combat to where somebody's going to, could you imagine if hundreds of millions of people died? I've said this in the past, for example, in World War II, we had over 70 million people die. And if you were to extrapolate those numbers, I think the population was 2.1 billion, and you were going to carry that through forward to today's numbers based on the percentage. What did I come up with? It was like 375 million people would die, like the entire population of the United States in a modern sort of epic that was as big as World War II. Maybe that's what this whole thing has been about since 9/11 to 2008 to COVID to whatever's going on. Maybe this is all about blowing up the world to give us some sort of dystopian future where the billionaires go to Mars with Elon Musk on the money of the full faith and credit of the United States, because we're going to wreak havoc on the sustainability of the only planet within, I don't know how many billions of light years, that can sustain life as we know it. And interestingly, I'm going to throw in a little bit of humor here because I've given so much nauseating terror to fill you with dread for the rest of your life, because I actually love humor above all else. Douglas Adams, the genius creator of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, he proclaimed through the deep think Googleplex computer the answer to life, the life, universe, and everything, and the answer became 42. Now, interestingly enough, through the James Webb Telescope, it shot its its direction to get pictures of places that were in the deep dark universe to find out everything they could about the Big Bang. And I think it went back to 12.5 billion years ago. They discovered what appears to be a celestial body that looks like a question mark. I shit you not. It's fucking beautiful that that's really what's going on. So for all of us that are filled with dread and everything else, look, what I'm trying to get you to understand as fast as humanly possible is that I did the work for 13 years, that I sacrificed my entire life, that destroyed my family, which was so hard, but to get the truth that the entirety of this corrupt, insane engine of evil and diabolical behavior has created to where the evil can literally take over the world through all of these vestiges in these sort of amalgamations of these different, game theory and gameplays that have been going on for now literally decades to create this outcome that is going to either A, destroy a good percentage of the world's population, or B, which we're doing anyway with all of the climate change, crisis, and then of course all of the species that are, going extinct every other day. It's like, this is the ultimate battle of good versus evil. This is absolutely the wickedness on display that I'm revealing to you, that I'm giving you a pathway to redemption, which I'll finish off on this note. And you probably, if you stuck this far, God bless you. Please like and subscribe and share. Please check out all of my stuff. But here's the thing about the nature of what we're seeing with Armageddon and becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, and Christianity and the nature of the second coming, and how this whole thing is supposed to work itself out. As I mentioned in one of my previous truth bombs, I'm Jewish. I'm not really a practicing Jew, but I am Jewish, okay? And I've got the answers this entire system cannot have you understand, because if tens of millions of you join me and we defeat this evil tyranny that has an iron grip on everything, that has created bondage and suffering, the likes that the world I don't think has ever seen, but they've done it based on the shadow power, that we can create this body of enlightenment to break the fucking grip of the evil and the wicked and destroy, the greatest trick the devil ever played, that convinced the world he didn't exist, because they were pissing on our heads telling us it's rain because they thought we were new fools. Refuse to be a tool in the fool circus. Get enlightened. Join me. Get to the hip with me, and let's bulldoze these ass clowns into history. And we don't have to do it violently. See, ultimately, the greatest justice that could ever come from this is defeating these guys and turning the tables on them and creating an energy paradigm and a global paradigm based on renewable energy, first and foremost. And second of all, just recontextualizing, let's say democracy and the democratization of economies in a scale where we create, abundance through the nature of capacity based on technology and other things, but through great planning because we have that capacity that ultimately, creates a dynamic culture. But we got to do that first and foremost in the United States for it to ever have a possibility to go around the world. And what I'm revealing to you is we've already spent $70 trillion on this incredible abomination of everything that we think we are. I'm just lifting up the freaking curtain, man. I'm revealing to you who Oz is. And it's because of everything that I've learned and sacrificed on this journey and going back to the rapture, the nature of, whatever is full on peace through the Messiah is the clean new deal that I'm helping to deliver. And I'm not Moses and I'm not Jesus, but I'm actually creating exodus from corruption to create the resurrection of the American dream that, oh yeah, if we understand how things work and we actually have a system of accountability to where evil grift can break through the psychology of that's existed from beginning of mankind, where manipulators and cheaters and liars and all of these people who leverage everything else get away with the crimes of the century, we have to break their freaking grip on power. We have to compete for it, and we have to win, and we have to recontextualize, reconfigure a country of, by, and for the people. That's what this is all about, not of, by, and for the corruption. Fascism is right on our doorstep because of corruption. Corruption births and fuels fascism. Fuck fascism. Fuck corruption. We have to create the clean new deal. So if you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, if we rise together to create a populist tidal wave to purge corruption because we are of liberty, dignity, decency, integrity, and ultimately sustainability, and of course, above all else, beauty, because in comedy, beauty and comedy, not tragedy, beauty and comedy, because what would life be worth without comedy and beauty, right? Nothing. If we come together in unity, we will defeat the misery of tyranny, and that will be our destiny, which is the clean new deal. Failure is not an option. Onwards and upwards, rise, roar, revolt. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. And when you have the truth, you're bulletproof.